I caught her crouched behind my rose bushes with binoculars. It was a Sunday morning. I was standing in my kitchen pouring coffee, still half asleep, when I noticed the glint of sunlight off glass through the window. I leaned closer. There she was, Verna Oakley, vice president of the Oak Ridge Estates HOA, squatting like some suburban ninja with a notepad and binoculars, peering straight through my living room window. I opened the window. Verna. "What in the actual hell are you doing?" She stood up like nothing was wrong, brushing dirt off her khakis. "Just checking on a potential code violation, Xavier. Your blinds were open and I noticed what might be an unauthorized ceiling fan. You're spying through my windows." "That's not a code violation, that's creepy." Verna didn't even blink. "As HOA vice president, it's my responsibility to enforce community standards." I stared at her in disbelief. "You've lost your damn mind." She walked off like she hadn't just committed felony-level weirdness. That was the last straw. For months, Verna had been micromanaging my property, once issuing a warning because my recycling bin was 2 shades too blue. She'd fine me for parking my own truck in my driveway overnight. She even complained that my dog barked with an aggressive tone. That night, I installed motion-sensitive cameras across the front and side of my home, and the footage I got over the next few days, gold. She was sneaking around at 5 a.m., taking pictures through my windows, recording audio from outside my bedroom, and once, get this, she reached through my gate to measure the distance between my trash cans. I took everything to my lawyer the following Monday. By Friday, I had a restraining order in hand. She was to stay at least 100 feet away from me and my property. I even posted a copy on my front door just to be clear. Not even 6 hours later, I heard the rustling again. I ran to my side window. Verna was back this time with a clipboard, standing on my lawn, snapping photos of my flower beds. I stepped outside holding the court order. "You violated this. You're not even trying to be subtle." She didn't even look ashamed. "The HOA is exempt from personal disputes. You're confusing civic duty with harassment." I called the cops. When the officer arrived, Verna tried to spin her usual story about community standards and authorized inspections. I handed him the footage and the restraining order, and the man's face went stone cold. "Ma'am," he said, "you're coming with me." She shrieked like someone had just canceled bingo night. "This is a mistake. I am the HOA." The officer didn't care. As she was stuffed into the back of the cruiser, she shouted, "You'll be sorry, Xavier." "The board will hear about this." I had no doubt they would. And I had a feeling the HOA wasn't done with me yet. But I'd just taken down their queen, and I wasn't backing down. By the following Tuesday, the Oak Ridge Estates HOA board called an emergency meeting. The invite came through a formal letter, hand-delivered by an elderly man in a lemon-yellow golf cart who looked like he hadn't blinked since the Reagan administration. The letter was printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock and signed by the board's acting president, a man named Leonard Grigsby, a retired CPA with an affection for bylaws and a forehead that looked like it had been carved from granite. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the community clubhouse. Attendance was mandatory for all homeowners, which was funny considering the HOA had no legal authority to require attendance without a 2/3 vote and a 30-day notice. But that was the HOA's game. They relied on people not knowing what they couldn't legally do. I showed up early, dressed in a navy suit I hadn't worn since my cousin's wedding. I walked in with a thick folder tucked under my arm and a flash drive in my pocket. The clubhouse smelled like pine-scented floor polish and passive aggression. Leonard stood behind a podium at the head of the room, flanked by 3 board members. A woman who wore her sunglasses indoors, a man who looked like he ironed his shoelaces, and a teenager who I assumed was someone's grandson but turned out to be the treasurer. As I took a seat, Leonard cleared his throat and tapped the mic. "We'll now address the incident involving Vice President Oakley," he said. "Due to recent misunderstandings, the board has unanimously agreed to review the conduct of one Mr. Xavier Price, homeowner of Lot 42, murmurs erupted. Leonard raised a hand. Please, let's keep this civil. Our community thrives on order. I stood. You're really going to spin this like I'm the problem? Leonard's eyes didn't blink. You filed a legal action against a sitting board member. That undermines our authority. Your board member was trespassing. I have video of her measuring my trash cans at sunrise. The woman with the sunglasses leaned forward. Xavier, we all want what's best for Oak Ridge. Sometimes that means a little extra vigilance. Peering through someone's bedroom window isn't vigilance, it's a criminal offense. The teenager Trevor, according to the nameplate, chimed in. We have a protocol for complaints. Filing restraining orders outside the board process creates confusion. I wasn't about to let that slide. I pulled the flash drive from my pocket and walked to the projector. Great, then let's clear up the confusion. The footage played on the wall behind Leonard. Gasps rippled through the room as Verna appeared on-screen, hunched behind the hydrangeas with what looked like a parabolic microphone. I let the silence hang before I spoke. She violated the restraining order 6 hours after it was issued. The police arrested her. And you're telling me I'm the threat to community order? Leonard's lip twitched. This meeting is now adjourned pending legal counsel. He stood abruptly, but before he could leave, 2 plainclothes detectives entered through the side door. One of them approached the podium and flashed a badge. Detective Morneau, County Sheriff's Office. We're investigating allegations of illegal surveillance and stalking. I'll need statements from each board member before the end of the day. The board froze. The sunglasses woman tried to act like she just remembered a dentist appointment. The detective continued. We also have cause to believe that HOA funds were used to purchase equipment involved in this surveillance. That would constitute misuse of community resources. Leonard sat down hard, his forehead glistening under the fluorescence. I turned to the room. If anyone else has been harassed by the HOA, now's the time to speak up. And they did. One woman said Verna had fined her twice for ornamental overgrowth because her lavender bush touched the sidewalk. A man from down the street revealed that Verna had entered his backyard without permission, claiming she was checking for mosquito breeding grounds. Another neighbor stood up and said he'd been fined for having offensive odor emissions after grilling ribs on his patio. The detectives took notes. One of them asked to see the HOA's financial records. Trevor, the teenager, looked like he was about to pass out. I left the meeting feeling a shift in the air, like the neighborhood had suddenly remembered it had rights. By the weekend, a petition had circulated calling for a vote to dissolve the current board. I didn't start it, but I signed it eagerly. So did 92 other homeowners. The following Monday, I received a certified letter in the mail. It was from the HOA, more specifically from their attorney. They were threatening to sue me for defamation, slander, and disruption of board operations. I laughed out loud. Then I dialed my own attorney. He was a friend of mine from college, now a civil rights lawyer with a specialty in housing law. I'd sent him everything, every video, every document, every email, and he'd already started building a countersuit. This is going to be fun, he said. They opened the door by threatening litigation. Now we subpoena everything. By Wednesday, the detectives returned to the clubhouse with a warrant. They seized HOA laptops, financial ledgers, and a locked cabinet labeled Community Relations. Inside was a binder marked Observation Logs. Each tab had a homeowner's name. Mine was the thickest. It included timestamps, photos, personal schedules, and notes on behavioral patterns. One entry read, Xavier Price tends to water his lawn shirtless. Consider issuing a decency notice. Another, observed receiving package from unknown woman at 3:14 p.m. Possible unregistered business activity. It was surveillance. Full-blown, coordinated, taxpayer-funded stalking. The kicker. The equipment had been purchased using discretionary funds marked for landscape lighting upgrades. The HOA wasn't just overreaching, they were committing fraud. The County Ethics Commission launched an investigation. Several board members resigned immediately. Leonard refused, claiming the charges were politically motivated. That lasted until they found an invoice for audio enhancement devices billed under community outreach. By the end of the month, he was out too. Verna, she'd retained a lawyer of her own. Rumor was she planned to sue the HOA for failing to support her during a lawful inspection. The irony was thick enough to spread on toast. The community held a special election to appoint a new board. This time, people paid attention. We voted in a contractor, a retired nurse, a high school teacher, and a guy who ran a food truck called Taco the Town. Normal people. People with actual lives, and me. I was asked to run too. I declined. Not because I wasn't tempted, but because I'd already done my part. I'd chased the wolf out of the woods. Now it was time for others to plant some trees. Still, I did agree to one thing. I'd write up a full set of clarifying amendments to the HOA charter. The first one passed unanimously. All board activities must be approved through public vote and documented in a monthly report. The second one was my favorite. No board member shall conduct surveillance or inspections within 10 feet of any homeowner's private residence without written consent and the presence of a neutral third party. We called it the Oakley Clause. And just like that, the HOA went from a secretive, power-drunk bureaucracy to a group of neighbors actually helping one another. Funny what happens when you shine a little light on the shadows. 2 weeks after the board was dismantled and the new members sworn in, I got a call from Detective Morneau. It was early, still dark out, and his voice was taut over the line. "Xavier, you might want to come down to the station. We've uncovered something bigger, something that affects more than just your neighborhood." I didn't ask questions. I threw on jeans, grabbed a jacket, and drove straight there. When I arrived, Morneau was waiting in the hallway, holding a thick manila folder and a USB stick. "The warrant we executed at the clubhouse." Our tech team pulled more than we expected. Verna didn't just keep surveillance logs, she compiled dossiers on dozens of homeowners. But that's not the worst of it. He opened the folder and slid out a printed spreadsheet. "This is a list of payments made from a shadow account linked to the HOA's reserve fund. We traced it to a shell company registered in Delaware under the name Northbridge Property Solutions. That company, turns out, is owned by Verna's cousin. And guess what Northbridge has been doing?" He tapped a line on the document where it showed a recurring payment labeled Property Evaluation and Compliance Services. They've been issuing internal evaluations on properties in the neighborhood, unofficially devaluing homes based on arbitrary code infractions like the ones Verna was constantly pushing. Then, when homeowners got fed up and moved, Northbridge would swoop in and buy the houses at her reduced-price cash offers, no inspections. I stared at the sheet. "You're telling me she was running a flipping scheme," Morneau nodded, "with HOA power as her leverage. And the reason she was so obsessed with your house is because it's one of the last unrenovated corner lots on the block. She had a standing evaluation in this folder marked High Priority Acquisition. That explained everything. The fines, the surveillance, the restraining order violations. She wasn't just a control freak. She was trying to pressure me into selling." Morneau stood. "We've already contacted the district attorney. This is now a criminal enterprise investigation. Racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. It's going to get messy." I asked if I could help. He told me to sit tight and keep documenting anything unusual. He didn't need to tell me twice. That afternoon, I upgraded my security system with license plate logging, added a second camera over the alley, and installed motion-triggered floodlights in the backyard. Just in time, 2-3 nights later, a white van with no plates parked across the street at 2 in the morning. The cameras caught a figure getting out, walking around the perimeter of my fence, then disappearing behind the hedges. I stayed inside, lights off, and called Morneau directly. By the time patrol arrived, the van was gone, but they found fresh boot prints in the dirt and a cut in the plastic casing around my irrigation system. They were trying to sabotage your property, Morneau said the next morning. If your yard floods, it violates the Water Conservation Clause in the HOA Charter. That's a fine and a demerit on your compliance record, even under the new board. I presented the footage to the board that same week. The new president, a woman named Rosa who ran a bakery off Highway 12, didn't hesitate. No more of this nonsense. We're locking down all remaining HOA accounts and we're hiring a forensic accountant. The accountant she brought in, an ex-IRS auditor named Malik, worked fast. Within 10 days, he found that over $60,000 had been siphoned into Northbridge's account in just the past 9 months. Worse, at least 4 homes had been acquired by Northbridge under suspicious circumstances, 2 of them now resold at double the price after cosmetic renovations. Rosa called a public forum in the clubhouse. This time, the mood was different. People weren't just angry, they were embarrassed they hadn't caught on sooner. One man stood up and said, "She had me convinced I was the problem, that my shutters weren't the right shade of cream." I repainted them twice. Another woman added, "They offered to buy my house last spring, said I'd never get another offer that high given my violations. I thought it was a favor." Rosa turned to Malik. "Can we recover any of the funds?" He nodded. "We're filing a civil claim against Northbridge. But we'll need every homeowner who was approached or harassed to submit a sworn statement." I volunteered to help coordinate the affidavits. Over the next week, I met with neighbors, helped them put their experiences into writing, and organized a secure Dropbox for the legal team. By the end of the week, we had 27 affidavits, enough to establish a pattern of coercion and fraud. The DA's office moved quickly. Verna was arrested at her sister's condo in Temecula, where she'd been staying since skipping a scheduled deposition. They found burner phones, HOA files, and a laptop with encrypted documents. When they cracked the drive, it contained spreadsheets tracking target properties in 3 other neighborhoods. Verna wasn't acting alone. 2 former HOA board members from nearby subdivisions were arrested within days. Each had similar setups: fake fines, surveillance logs, and shell companies registered under family names. The DA called it a real estate racket disguised as community management. The state attorney general issued a statement within the month announcing a broader investigation into HOA corruption across the county. Meanwhile, back in Oak Ridge, we were rebuilding. The board launched a full audit of all rules and fines. They eliminated vague infractions like tone of landscaping and overly assertive decor. They even removed the restriction on overnight truck parking. I parked mine in the driveway that night just because I could. But something else happened too. The neighborhood started to breathe. People who never spoke before were waving at each other. Kids played in front yards again. One couple hosted an outdoor movie night in their driveway. Rosa's bakery truck even started making Saturday morning rounds. Then one evening, I got a knock at my door. It was the man from down the street, the one who used to mow his lawn at dawn just to avoid complaints. "I just wanted to say thanks," he said, "for standing up to her, for not folding." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. He handed me a small card. Inside was a note from several neighbors, all thanking me, and a gift card to the hardware store with a handwritten line: "For the next upgrade, cameras or flowers, your call." I kept the cameras, but I planted flowers too, ones Verna would have hated. And every time I watered them, I thought about how close we'd come to losing the soul of our neighborhood to a woman with binoculars and a clipboard, not because she was powerful, but because she thought no one would fight back. This time, someone did, and everything changed. On a calm Thursday morning, I received a certified letter from the county prosecutor's office. It wasn't unexpected, but the contents turned my stomach. A grand jury had returned multiple felony indictments, 47 counts in total, against Verna Oakley and 2 former Oak Ridge Estates board members. Charges included conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, unlawful surveillance, wire fraud, and witness intimidation. The phrase pattern of organized criminal behavior appeared more than once. I sat at my kitchen table, reading through the paperwork while my dog chewed a squeaky toy underfoot. It was surreal. Just months ago, I was dealing with citations for an unapproved garden hose color. Now the neighborhood was ground zero in a statewide scandal. The key piece of evidence that tied it all together wasn't the surveillance logs or even the shell company finances. It was an audio file recovered from Verna's personal hard drive. In it, she was recorded speaking with a man later confirmed to be a licensed real estate broker. They discussed fabricated violations used to motivate reluctant sellers and even mentioned specific tactics for targeting emotionally vulnerable residents. Her voice was cold, clinical, detached. I had to pause the playback halfway through. Later that afternoon, I met with Rosa and the rest of the new board at the clubhouse. The place had been repainted, the old portraits removed, and the outdated code enforcement bulletin board replaced with a corkboard full of local event flyers. The mood was still serious. Rosa handed me a heavy envelope. We've been contacted by several homeowners who received anonymous letters threatening legal action if they spoke to law enforcement. Most of them were elderly. None of them had lawyers. What did the letters say? I asked. They implied that speaking out would violate a confidentiality clause in their HOA agreement. Total fiction, of course, but enough to scare people. Any idea who sent them? Postmarks trace back to a UPS drop in another county, but the language matches Verna's phrasing from past documents. Malik thinks it was her attempt to tamp down testimony. I leaned back in the chair. She's not even out on bail. How could she coordinate this through her cousin, the same one who set up Northbridge? He's not in custody yet. That clicked something into place. I remembered a face from the neighborhood, the man who had handed out petitions weeks before the board flip. Friendly on the surface, but always asking detailed questions about people's homes. I hadn't seen him since the arrests, but I remembered his name, Everett. I pulled out my phone and searched my security footage archives. Sure enough, I found a clip from the night the unmarked van had circled my house. There was a man pacing beside it, checking his watch. I froze the frame and zoomed in. Same jawline, same gold pinky ring. Everett. I forwarded the clip to Detective Morneau with a note. Possible courier? That same evening, the county sheriff's office issued a warrant for Everett's arrest. He was picked up in a shopping center parking lot, carrying a satchel full of pre-stamped envelopes and a burner phone. When questioned, he admitted he'd been instructed to mail out the letters on a schedule, using rotating drop points. They found flash drives in his trunk containing partial drafts of new letters and a list titled Non-Compliant Owners. My name was at the top. The prosecutors now had enough to reclassify the case from fraud to a RICO violation Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. That changed everything. It meant longer potential sentences, mandatory asset forfeiture, and the ability to pull in any additional players connected to the scheme. It also meant the HOA's insurance provider got involved. Once they learned the extent of the illegal activity, they dropped coverage and filed a liability claim against the former board. That move forced the HOA into a financial corner. If they didn't act fast, the entire community would be on the hook for legal damages. Rosa called a full homeowner assembly that weekend in the clubhouse. This time, the place was standing room only. "I'm going to be blunt," she said. "If we don't formally dissolve the old HOA entity and restructure under a new charter, the financial fallout could drag us all down. We've spoken with a municipal consultant, and there's a legal path forward." The plan was intricate but solid. Dissolve Oak Ridge Estates HOA, Inc., and replace it with a neighborhood council, a voluntary civic group with no enforcement authority. All legal liabilities would remain attached to the dissolved entity, now defunct. It was the only way to protect the residents from lawsuits and financial ruin stemming from Verna's crimes. The vote passed with an overwhelming majority. 98 households out of 111 voted in favor. By the following week, the paperwork was filed with the state. The HOA was legally dead, no more fines. No more secret meetings, no more creeping around with clipboards and binoculars. News of the scandal had spread far beyond our zip code. A regional news station ran a feature on it titled Neighborhood Watchdog or Real Estate Predator, and it aired during the evening news slot. I watched as footage of Verna being led out of her sister's condo in cuffs played across the screen. The reporter mentioned that state lawmakers were now drafting legislation to increase oversight of HOA boards and limit their enforcement capabilities. They even floated the idea of mandatory third-party audits for any HOA with more than 50 homes. It was a strange feeling watching it all unfold from my living room. The same living room Verna once peered into with binoculars, looking for reasons to make my life a living hell. A month later, I received a letter from the district attorney's office, thanking me for my cooperation. It included a final update. Verna had accepted a plea deal in exchange for testifying against her cousin and the 2 other board members. She would serve 7 years in state prison with no chance of early parole. Her cousin faced a separate federal indictment. The neighborhood council held a small gathering in the Central Park to mark the beginning of a new chapter. There were food trucks, a local jazz trio, and even a bounce house. Someone brought a poster board with snapshots from the early days of the neighborhood before the HOA turned into a surveillance state. I stood near the grill, flipping burgers, when an older man walked up and handed me a mason jar of iced tea. His name was Ed, a veteran who had lived on the street for over 30 years. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said, nodding toward the smiling crowd. "I was ready to sell and move out last year. You changed that." I didn't know what to say. I just raised my glass. Later that night, I walked through my yard, past the now thriving flower beds and the motion-triggered lights. The house felt different, not just safe or free. The cameras were still up, but now they served a different purpose. Peace of mind, not defense. No more manufactured violations. No more anonymous letters. Just the sound of kids playing, wind through the trees, and the occasional whir of sprinklers. I deleted the last remaining footage from the Verna era, backed up only to a secure drive in case of any future legal needs. But I never looked at it again. I didn't need to. The neighborhood had seen the truth. The community had stood up, and the people who tried to manipulate, control, and profit from fear had been driven out. Justice didn't come quickly, but it came hard, and it stayed.